local history, local culture, local events, your community. This is the Joe Kelly Show.
And welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are in Oriskany at the Oriskany Village Museum. We're going to be talking about a lot of history. We're going to be talking about it with Alexis Werchowski Albright. Did I get that all right?
You did.
Good, Alexis. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for
having
having us in here. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to Oriskany, and I looked at your website the other day, and I liked what was on there. It said, little village with a big history.
We are.
And there's a lot of history here. Incredible.
Yes. Everything from pre-colonial history to Revolutionary War history, and then all the way through the 19th centuries, all sorts of innovations, involvement in national events, the Erie Canal coming through, the United County regiments for the Civil War. There was soldiers enlisted from here, and then the aircraft carrier being named after the Revolutionary War battle.
Yeah, let's take it one by one. The U.S.S. Oriskany.
Yes.
Just a tremendous ship. Saw duty in Vietnam and Korea too, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And this is kind of developed to be the home of the U.S.S. Oriskany.
It is. I've had some of the shipmates tell me that the ship lives here now. The ship became an artificial reef off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, as the first pilot program in the Navy's artificial reef program. So a lot of the artifacts from the ship are here, everything from the radar unit to some of the door signage, and many more pieces of history have come to us from veterans of the ship.
I'm looking over your shoulder and I see a model of an aircraft carrier. That's not the Oriskany though.
No, that's the U.S.S. Yorktown. So a lot of the Essex-class carriers were named after Revolutionary War battles. So you got Oriskany, Yorktown, Saratoga. And this is what the Oriskany looked like in its original configuration. The Yorktown was also a straight deck carrier. Oriskany became a Frankenstein of a ship after a while. It was built for World War II, saw service in Korea, and then was retrofitted for Vietnam, and became an angle deck carrier, which gave the jets more room to take off and land. So it didn't look much like any of the other carriers of its class by the time it was finished in service.
Yeah, and speaking of jets, you've got an A-4E Skyhawk jet sitting right out on your lawn.
Yes.
And you know the history behind that airplane. I don't, but I do know that it was not flown off the Oriskany, correct?
Correct. This is a prototype model that was used to help sell the A-4E specifically to the Navy. The Navy actually used the Skyhawks all the way up until 2003 when they took the last ones out of service. They're a great little plane. They have a heavy carry load. They're fast. And they're perfectly designed to go on and off the decks of an aircraft carrier because they're compact. Some of the models, the wings even fold up, which make them a popular choice for air shows now.
Yeah, you can look at that airplane and not know anything about aviation, but know that's a fast airplane just by looking at it.
Yes.
One of the famous people who did fly off the Oriskany in an A-4E was the late Senator John McCain.
Yes, yes. He flew the flight that he became a POW off the Oriskany. And we have a picture of him here in the museum. The A-4 was a very popular model at the time that he was in service. And that's what he would have seen on the decks of the carrier when he was going on and off ship. When,
I think it was 1966, Alexis, there was a devastating fire on the Oriskany, yes?
There was 3 carrier fires during the Vietnam era, and unfortunately Oriskany was one of them. In October of 1966, there was a flare locker incident. One of the flares was being unloaded and was accidentally ignited, and in the panic, the flare was thrown back in the locker rather than overboard. And it created a huge fire very near officers' quarters. There ended up being 43 fatalities the first day and another from smoke inhalation the next day. It took the crew most of the day. It started around 7 a.m. and it took about 12 hours to get things under control. They had responses from other ships bringing in supplies. And it ended up making the Oriskany the subject of a training video later in the era to make sure that nothing like that ever happened again. But the 44 flags and plaques that you see around the U.S.S. Oriskany anchor in the park are for the 44 lost in the 1966 fire.
The park is, it's such a neat little park, and I think that Andy Trinkaus had a lot to do with that park, did he not?
He helped design the Anchor Memorial. There was a huge team. Don Rothsteiner was mayor at the time. Bob Healy was curator here at the museum, and he had a great team with the Historical Society behind him, interfacing with Captain John Arabino and the other veterans of the U.S.S. Oriskany, and getting everything moved here. We have the actual starboard anchor from the ship, and it weighs about 15 tons and another 2 ton for the links. So it was a big cooperative effort to get it here. It ended up being flown from the West Coast, and the portside anchor is actually still in California.
I think it's in, I'm trying to think of the name of the park. I've seen it long ago. I can't think of the name of the park that it's in out there. Do you know?
It's right on the dock, but I'm not sure what the park is named.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned, though, talking about names, I'm glad you mentioned the name Bob Healy.
Yes.
Bob Healy was, the late Bob Healy, was such a great gentleman, kind gentleman, did so much work for local history. Incredible man.
Yes. He was the first curator of the building here. This building was built in 1997. Before that, the museum collection had been housed above the Oriskany Library, further up on Utica Street, a couple of blocks. Then when the library got their own building in 1989, the Historical Society moved completely into that building and started fundraising for this building. So he helped open that Memorial Day of '97, and he was curator here for a year before his passing.
Yeah, I'm glad he had a chance to see this building.
Yes.
I remember he used to have a receptacle outside his house for cans and bottles that he would take to a redemption center and use the money to go to this.
We still have a bottle bin here. We've been having a perpetual bottle drive for almost 30 years. And they're picked up weekly. We have a deck box outside, and a lot of people have been bringing them to us the whole time through, and it really helps with our budget and making sure that we can keep everything in good shape.
And Bob Healy has a monument out on the lawn as well.
He does.
What other monuments are out there?
There's a time capsule that's still got over 50 years on it. There's World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and of course the Anchor Memorial for the 44 from the 66 fire. But we also have a couple of memorials down by the Oriskany Post Office, including one marking the site of where Herkimer's militia camped the night before the Battle of Oriskany.
We're going to talk about that in a second. You've got a reunion upcoming here, not too far down the road.
Correct. So the U.S.S. Oriskany shipmates have a reunion association ever since around the time the anchor was installed in the early 90s. They've been meeting annually. They keep in touch with each other with a quarterly newsletter, and every year they choose where they're going to meet. This year they're meeting in Oriskany, New York. It's been a while since they've been on the East Coast. They used to come more often because the ship originally docked in New York City, so a lot of the vets were based on the East Coast. The ship at the end of service was based in California and up and down the West Coast, so a lot of the younger veterans are still living out west. So they're making the journey here, and we're really looking forward to having them here. They're gonna come into town on October 1st. So if you see a lot more Oriskany hats that week, you'll know what's up.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but then we'll be right back. Short break. We'll be back with a second. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. Alexis Albright is our guest. She is the curator here at the Oriskany Village Museum. And when she's not doing that, she's also the village clerk. When can somebody come in here?
I'm here Wednesday evenings during the Oriskany Farmers Market, 3 to 7. We also take tour appointments for Thursday nights, and I'm here Saturday afternoons, 12 to 4.
The Oriskany Village Museum has a lot more than just the Oriskany. We'll get to that in a second, but I saw over there, and it brought back, I've watched this movie so many times, The Bridges of Tokyo Ri, am I pronouncing that?
Tokyo Ri, yeah.
Yeah, and that was a William Holden film. Great movie.
Yeah.
And if they didn't call it the Oriskany in the movie, but they used the Oriskany in the movie for that.
Correct.
Yeah.
A lot of the veterans are very proud. They'll watch that movie just to see the ship.
Yeah.
But we have a couple of copies of it here, and it's great to have the ship in its glory days caught on major film.
What are you going to do when the veterans come back here in October? You got any plans for them?
Yes, so they're spending a day here, and they'll also visit the Oriskany battlefield. That's something that when they're docked in New York, the leadership of the ship would actually arrange trips for them to come see what the ship was named after. So they'll make a pilgrimage out to the Oriskany battlefield, and then they'll also go out to visit the Oriskany Legion, and they like to do some sightseeing too. So send a few of them towards the Scenic Railroad, maybe a few up to Munson Williams, and let them see the sights.
Good. That's a good segue for me to talk about the Battle of Oriskany. Thank you. The soldiers, the militia that marched from German Flats area to the battle, or they're trying to get to Fort Stanwix, they must have marched pretty close to this front door.
Yes, right past here. So at the time, it was the village of Oriskany, which was just inside the treaty line of Fort Stanwix. It was mostly, it was very near to a lot of other Oneida villages, and they camped here the night before. They were going to send a couple of messengers ahead to the fort, let them know they were coming, and about 60 Oneida ended up joining with them to help relieve the fort. They were supposed to march the next morning, but they hadn't heard from their messengers. They had a very large argument by all accounts on whether to keep marching, and they did, but they ended up marching into an ambush.
Let me interrupt you there. When you say they camped here, whereabouts is here?
Just the other side of the creek, near in front of the Oriskany post office is where the historical marker has been. It was placed almost a century ago, but we know that the village was here along the creek, and we know that the old military road was close to the path of the original Erie Canal, which is close to the path of Route 69, which runs just past here.
So did they kind of come up, do you think, if we're driving over Route 69, do you think we're driving over where they marched?
There was 800 of them, so given how far they would have spread out, yes, you're in their footsteps when you're on Route 69.
And then they got up the next morning and marched on and got to where the battlefield is today. Talk about what happened then, Alexis.
So as they approached the low spot on the battlefield, the front of the line was attacked by the British. They'd recruited Mohawk allies, and they were lying in wait for the militia. For the militia, this had been a brewing conflict. Brigadier General Nicholas Herkimer was in charge of the militia, and even his brother was a loyalist. So there's some local researchers that call it a civil war for the Mohawk Valley at the time. A lot of the people on the other side, the loyalists that were with the British officers, they were their neighbors, their trading partners, people they saw at church. So they weren't professional soldiers, they were farmers and craftsmen, they were militia. So when the front of the line was hit, word got to the back, and by many accounts it was a very chaotic battle. There was a thunderstorm in the middle of it, which allowed the Americans to regroup, but Herkimer was shot very early in the battle. He was shot through the leg, killing his horse, but he refused to leave the field. So his men propped him up against a tree. There's a marker for where the witness tree was on the battlefield. And eventually there was a sortie from the fort, which disturbed the British camp. Word got to the front, and the British were forced to retreat. So the Americans held the field, but they took about 50% casualties. And by 1900, they called it the bloodiest battle of the Revolution.
Yeah, they also said that creek that still runs in there flowed red. There was so much. Yeah.
There are historical accounts that call it Bloody Creek, because it did run red.
You mentioned Herkimer propped up against the tree. There's a famous painting of that. It's so famous they made it into a U.S. postage stamp, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
The painting's by an artist named Yon, and the original's at the Utica Public Library.
Yeah, next time I get down there, I've got to talk to the director about that painting. I've got to take a look at it again. It's been years since I've seen it. I guess the battlefield that is owned by the state
Correct.
today is all on the north side of Route 69.
Correct.
Did any of that battle spill over onto the other side of Route 69?
Probably.
Yeah.
Given the changes to the terrain in the early years of the Erie Canal, a lot of that land was also farmed after the Revolution. By about 20 years after, there's agriculture and process out there, but the center of the battlefield was well marked. The witness tree for Herkimer has been gone almost 200 years, but even accounts into the 1830s, you see them recognizing that site and celebrating the anniversary, making sure there's a flag on the site. So even though development sort of circled it, they tried to preserve the center of the site.
Yeah. Are there any artifacts in the museum tracing back to that?
We have a Revolutionary Era powder horn, as well as some arrowheads and a few other Revolutionary Era artifacts, but mostly things that you'd find on a homestead, candle mold, things like that. Because of the age between when the battle occurred and when the Historical Society was started here, we have a lot more things from the Civil War era up.
One of the things that, I mean, it's gruesome, but they didn't the Americans didn't bury their dead. They left the battlefield and went back to German flats in Herkimer.
They did. With the number of injured, they ended up marching back to Herkimer home. The general was brought back. They didn't have a surgeon immediately on hand that could perform an amputation, and gangrene set in, and even though they did eventually perform an amputation, Herkimer died about 10 days after the battle. We're trying to trace the individual stories of the other soldiers that were injured, taken prisoner, or marched back on their own from the battle after it was over. And we're tracing those right now through U.S. pension applications. After 1818, veterans or their families of the Revolution were able to apply to the federal government for pensions. And in order to do so, they had to fill out a pretty lengthy statement about their service. They had to have witness statements recognizing them as Revolutionary War veterans. And we're uncovering a lot more of their individual stories through the narrative that most of them swore in front of the court in Herkimer County.
Yeah, there's so much more to talk about the battle, but we got to get to Summit Park. And I'd also like to mention Trinkaus Manor. That was a big part of this village for a long time. Alexis Albright's our guest. She's the curator of the museum, and she's also the village clerk. Short break, right back. And welcome back, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. We are at the Oriskany Village Museum in the village of Oriskany, right off Route 69. We're talking with Alexis Albright. She's the curator, and she's also the village clerk, and she also helps take care of the farmers market, yes?
I do. We have a farmers market here on Wednesdays during the summer. It runs from June through September, and it's right out here in front of the museum, so it's a great time to visit the museum. We have a bunch of farms. You can come get eggs, fresh meat. There's somebody that hand makes soap, a lot of crafts, and also fresh food, so you can come get dinner, pick up your groceries, and come stop in and pick up some history.
Every Wednesday?
Every Wednesday through the end of September.
Okay. When I think of Oriskany, I think of many things, the battle, the aircraft carrier, but I also think of Summit Park.
Yes.
And when I was a boy, Summit Park was still, a long time ago, but it was still in operation. But that was the second Summit Park, was it not?
Yes. So it was open as a picnic park. Most people remember it from the 60s. It was called Summit Park Playground at the time. They had a large in-ground swimming pool and a bunch of picnic sites. But earlier than that, it was a full amusement park as the Victorians knew it. So it opened Memorial Day of 1897. And just a few years back, we had a historic marker put in for where the trolley used to run into the park, up Oklahoma Avenue, into the bluffs over where the elementary school is now. And they had a wooden roller coaster, a carousel, baseball fields, amusement games, and they had some big speakers to come in. Even Teddy Roosevelt came to speak after his presidency. They'd have all sorts of corporate picnics and parties, and sometimes they'd have big bands till 2 or 3 in the morning.
Yeah, they had a dance pavilion up there, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah, yeah.
And they even had games of chance and all sorts of different attractions. But for a nominal fare, you could get your trolley ticket, your admittance into the park, and the locals would walk or bicycle up too. And that ran until 1926.
Mm-hmm. And then it went out of use for a long time, and then came back about when?
Late 50s, early 60s, and it was open about a decade. And like I said, they had a very large in-ground swimming pool. A lot of people I talk to now that remember Summit Park, they learned to swim up there as children.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was a great vacation spot on the weekend for the locals.
Just what's up there now? Just overgrown?
It's just overgrown. There's still a couple of foundation stones from each iteration. But it's becoming even more difficult to get up in there, and it's private property now. Mm-hmm. But there's been a couple plans over the years, even in the 70s, plans to develop it into a neighborhood, develop it into recreation space, but nothing's really taken hold.
Yeah, but it seems like that's a big resource sitting up there. Speaking of resources, one of the resources of Oriskany back in the day was Trinkaus Manor. People came from all over to go to Trinkaus Manor, especially during the Christmas holidays.
Yes. They had, a lot of people have seen the lights now in Rome, but they all used to be displayed in a much smaller location at the manor, all the way around the dining room and on the facade of the building. So Trinkaus Manor was started after the 4 Trinkaus brothers came back from World War II. Their parents had been running the Oriskany Hotel, which was where the Oriskany Library is today. And with the boys coming home, they expanded the family business, and it became Trinkaus Manor, as many people remember it. Mm-hmm. But those lights, they were iconic, and they still are, as far as a symbol of the manor and what people remember about Oriskany. I get calls from people up and down the East Coast that came here and said, do you have pictures of Trinkaus? I remember going there. Or locals, we drove in from Syracuse to come see the lights, or we went there for my graduation dinner, and even some of the Oriskany proms were up there too. Yeah,
my daughter had her wedding reception there.
Yeah.
The spot that Oriskany holds is really kind of a, I don't know how you want to phrase it, but down the way here is the Erie Canal.
Yes.
Here's where the troops marched to the Battle of Oriskany. Trinkaus Manor, Summit Park. Incredible when you think about it.
Yeah, Oriskany has a little thread from almost every event in U.S. history. Just the amount of history that converges here really is a crossroads. And Route 69 is very close to where the military road is. It's almost exactly where the Erie Canal was. And the first iterations of the Erie Canal came through here. It was moved and widened a little bit over the years, but it went by Waterbury Mill. And that really was a lifeblood for the town in its early years.
Yeah, Waterbury Mill, now that's vacant, but that was a huge mill.
It was, and it operated, it was founded in 1811, incorporated, and operated up until about the Civil War. It was briefly an iron foundry, and then the Waterburys came through and purchased it, and that operated until about 2012.
They made felt, didn't they?
They did. They made paper makers felt, which was actually used in newspaper making to make large sheets of paper. Wool has natural properties that help repel water, so it keeps it from getting sopping wet during the paper making process, which makes it a good fit. And the Waterburys had a proprietary joining process where they could join together smaller rolls of felt to make large expanses of felt, which really put them on the map.
Our artifacts still, I'm looking around the museum and you've got such great artifacts here. Are artifacts still coming in?
Yes, almost weekly. Either I get a call or something in the mail, and it could be anything from, I found this stack of photographs from the mill, can they have a home here? Or we had a World War II footlocker come in not long ago. Different people call from all over the place. There's a few things that we don't take anymore, just from a space standpoint. Trinkaus Manor used to sell juice glasses in their gift shop. So I tell people that, keep that in your personal collection because, you want to make sure that those things are out there for people to enjoy in other places too. But a lot of things come here, and it makes for a great research collection too. We have pamphlets from Summit Park, we have schematics from the ship, all sorts of things. So if anybody's looking into that or their family history, we have a lot of records here.
Do you sell any items here?
We do have a small gift shop selection. We're actually looking to get that ramped up for our summer season. We have an extensive gift shop online at oriskanymuseum.com, and since most people have been traveling the last couple years, that's where most people have been shopping. So our in-store inventory's dwindled, but we're looking to launch that at the end of the summer season to get more merchandise in person as people are traveling more.
I wonder when the veterans from the Oriskany come into town in October, I wonder if they'll be bringing anything to donate.
Historically, when they come here, usually they have things in tow. It can be anything from snapshots to some of them have door plaques if they were plank owners when the ship was decommissioned. Some of them were allowed to come in and collect things. So things come to us that way, or military uniforms and things in their personal collection.
Thanks for having us in.
Thanks for coming.
Good luck in October and continued success to you. That's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back next week. We'll do it all again. Don't forget cnyhomepage.com. I almost forgot. cnyhomepage.com. There's a lot of good stuff there too. Till next time, take care of yourself, everybody.